Everyone, my name is Mike Kingsella, and I am the CEO of Up for Growth, a national cross-sector member network laser-focused on solving America's housing underproduction through data-driven research and evidence-based policy. We're so excited to talk today about the conversion potential of commercial real estate to meet America's housing needs. Before we get into the program and discussion of this area of policy innovation, I'd like to talk about a couple of quick housekeeping issues. One, later in this conversation, in the panel discussion, please feel free to submit questions through the chat and Q&A. I'd also like to flag that for those of you who do not yet follow Up for Growth, you can go to our website at upforgrowth.org, upforgrowth.org, and sign up for our email list, and also follow us on Twitter at up4growth. Again, on Twitter at sign up4growth. As you all know, Up for Growth is focused on solving the gap between the housing we have and the housing that we need. And with increasing office vacancies across many cities and communities across the country, the conversion of office and commercial in general to residential is an exciting policy opportunity. And folks in elected office, from the federal level all the way down to City Hall, are working on moving solutions forward. And that's what today's discussion really is going to center around. Before we move into comments from our partners, American Planning Association, CalFE, and ICSC, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Congressman Jimmy Gomez from California's 51st District. From California's 34th Congressional District. Congressman Gomez is a leader on housing in the U.S. Congress and hails from Southern California. He has a background in labor organizing and also has a background in the healthcare space, and in his role on the House Committee on Ways and Means recently introduced legislation that would create a new federal tax policy to support the conversion of obsolete and vacant office spaces into residential and mixed-use properties. So a great perspective on what the federal government can do to really move the needle on both repurposing underutilized office space and solving America's housing underproduction. But before we turn our attention over to the congressman, I'd like to introduce Phillips Hinch with ICSC, our sponsor for today's webinar. So with that, Phillips, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Mike. ICSC is very excited to partner with Up for Growth on this important issue. ICSC's members represent America's marketplaces, the places that people go to shop, dine, work, and play. Our members include property owners and developers of shopping centers, malls, and main streets, as well as many financial institutions, brokers, professional service providers, and tenants. Adapting underutilized commercial space offers tremendous opportunities to improve the surrounding area's economic vitality, increase the local tax base, create local permanent jobs, and importantly, provide new housing. These conversions, however, are often more complex than ground-up projects and come with their own sets of risks to manage. So I'm looking forward to hearing from our panel of experts today on this issue. I'm also thrilled that we are joined by Representative Jimmy Gomez from the great state of California, who's doing great work to solve these problems. Congressman, I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Philip. Hinch, sorry about that. Getting organized here a little bit. Hope everybody's having a good morning. I just have a newborn baby boy. He's about 8 weeks old, so I'm still feeling the lack of sleep. But this is such an important topic for my district. I represent the east side of LA, including downtown Los Angeles. Well, everything from Hancock Park to downtown Boa Heights, unincorporated East LA through Eagle Rock. And it is a district of just vast disparities. You have people who are extremely wealthy, and then people who are living on the streets, people who bought homes during the peak of the housing market, and people who are selling at the peak of the housing market. This is something that it is I think at the epicenter of a lot of the housing crisis that we're seeing across the country. And it's something that is a top priority for me in my district, in order to build more affordable housing throughout Los Angeles, but also through nationwide. And I think we need to utilize every single tool at our disposal, including the federal tax code, to stimulate equitable economic and housing growth. In Los Angeles, rents are increasing faster than wages, and families are being pushed out of high opportunity neighborhoods that have access to jobs, public transportation, healthcare, and grocery stores. Affordable housing is also a matter of race and equity, because Blacks and Latino households are disproportionately cost burdened renters. Renters who pay more than 30% of their household incomes for housing often do so at the expense of their basic needs, going without food, medicine, or transportation. And when they can't do that, they get pushed out and they have to move further and further away from their friends and family. The lack of affordable housing just doesn't impact Los Angeles. As I mentioned, the United States has a shortage of 7 million rental homes that are affordable and available to extremely low income renters. As many business permanently embrace a telework model, the conversion of old office buildings can serve as a solution to our affordable housing crisis. During the pandemic, commercial districts that lost their office workers turned into complete ghost towns, hurting local businesses and restaurants that relied on those commuters. These buildings are centrally located near public transportation and offer the opportunity to create thriving neighborhoods. That is why I introduced the Revitalizing Downtowns Act to create a new federal tax credit to support the conversion of obsolete office buildings into residential and mixed-use properties. This is more sustainable and environmentally friendly than a new build. And 20% of those units in a residential conversion will go towards affordable housing stock. And that is something that I insisted on, since we know that we need to have a robust and healthy downtown cores. One of the things that I noticed during the pandemic in LA, we built a lot of market rate housing, especially in downtown within what they call the freeway ring. And what happened during the pandemic is that often people that could afford those market rate housing units were able to pick up and leave during the pandemic. So a neighborhood that should have been thriving and vibrant became a ghost town because the people that had money left. You didn't see that in working class neighborhoods because they didn't have the money to just leave their homes and go live somewhere else. So the right distribution of affordable units and market rate units is essential, I believe, to have a healthy neighborhood and I believe a healthy downtown core in cities. And that's what I want this to do, is to help provide more housing, but to strengthen the fabric of downtown cores so that it can support economic growth. It can help small business. It can provide families with more affordable housing options. It is, I believe, crucial. And most people don't know this, maybe they do, but the city of LA has already have a history of converting office space into housing. In the early 2000s, actually the late 1990s, there's something called the Adaptive Reuse Ordinance that was passed at the state level that kind of relaxed some of the building codes and some of the codes to convert old office buildings into housing. In downtown, which I represent now, I was a student back in the late 1990s at college. They had almost 1 million square feet of unused office space. So that helped build nearly 50,000 residential units through that change in code, the adaptive reuse of commercial buildings, and especially helped the historic core neighborhood and the arts district. So we know that if we do this, we can actually spur thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of units to be produced in Los Angeles if we just convert the underutilized commercial properties that are, I would say, getting more plentiful by the day. So, but we do need a whole of government approach to tackle this housing problem. The Revitalizing Downtowns Act will incentivize, I believe, the conversion of these existing buildings into affordable units by making them more financially feasible. Boosting the production of affordable housing will provide, I think, families with the stability they need to stay healthy and invest in their households. This is a long-term approach. Housing is not built overnight, as you all know, and it's a problem that we let fester in California and across the country for far too long. Just in California alone, we're still short about 1.3 million units of new housing. So we have a lot of work to do, but if we start right away, we can start tackling this problem today and not wait till tomorrow. So I want to just thank the Up for Growth team for inviting me to speak. Keep at it. Your advocacy makes a difference. And we're going to keep pushing on the Revitalizing Downtowns Act with Dan Kildee from Michigan, John Larson from two of my colleagues on the Ways and Means Committee from Hartford, Connecticut, and as well as Senator Stabenow. We're going to keep pushing because we know that housing is a crucial item on our agenda that we're not going to give up. Take it away, Mike. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Jamie Gregory here with Calfee, Halter, and Griswold. We are the sponsors of the webinar series on federal issues. So I welcome everybody. Just a quick update or a quick information on who Calfee is. We're relatively new to the Washington scene, having an office here for, I believe, the last 5 or 6 years. But Calfee, Halter, and Griswold was founded in Cleveland in 1903 as a full corporate law firm. Offices in addition to Cleveland, in Columbus, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, New York City, and right here on Farragut Square in Washington. We have a very active federal lobbying program with, and I personally have been lobbying real estate and housing issues for over 30 years. So I'm looking forward to the conversation coming up. Lots of good information will be coming from the panelists, and I'm going to turn it over to Professor Chris Nelson, who will be doing the moderating.
Well, thank you very much. I actually had some prepared remarks that ran about, I don't know, 40 minutes or so, but I don't think we have the time for that. But instead, I have a presentation I want to walk through before we get to the panelists. Many of the issues that I wanted to raise to begin with were already raised by Congressman Gomez. So he was a great introduction to the whole webinar here. So as we load up the slides, there we go. So I'll have the slides advanced as we go through this. After the slide presentation, we'll have our great guests, and they'll be introducing themselves as we present the questions. So some overview of concepts. Adaptive reuse refers to reusing an existing building for different purposes. And around the world, it's often called repurposing the building, also known as recycling or conversion or similar terms. Adaptive reuse has prevented the demolition of thousands of buildings since 1950 especially, and can advance sustainability and facilitate a circular economy, which is a king point of sustainability. Not every old building can be adaptively reused. Some are just beyond their useful life and have to be torn down for a variety of reasons. We'll talk about some of those reasons later on. To work, though, adaptive reuse needs to be financially feasible, meaning there needs to be a market for it and has to generate competitive returns to investors. Now, this is a role for tax policy and public policy to help bridge the gap between what the private sector can generate for returns and what the public policy wants in terms of adding housing to the economy. And then adaptive reuse applies to any conversion of a building from one use to another. For example, in downtown Tucson here, where I live in Arizona, 1/3 of an old office building has been replaced or converted into hotel rooms. So hotels on the bottom floors and offices on the top floors. But our focus here today will be almost exclusively on conversion of non-residential to residential uses. Next slide, please. So this slide shows from 2010 annually, the redevelopment of older buildings into apartments. On the left-hand column is the number of apartment units per year. So you see on the right-hand side, 2021, about 20,000 units were converted. That's actually a little higher going into 2022 already. And on the right-hand column, right-hand axis, we see the number of buildings. So about 150 buildings or thereabouts in 2021 being converted. And so you look over the years and you add them all up, and maybe there's a couple thousand buildings converted between 2010 and 2022 or 21. But that's compared to more than 100 million other commercial, institutional, and industrial non-residential buildings. So we have a good pace, but it's not even a drop in the so-called bucket. Next slide, please. So here we see the distribution of redevelopment for residential uses by type of initial use: office, factory, hotel. And here you see on the left-hand side the number of apartments for each of these uses, with the office being by far and away the largest conversion. That's interesting because, or important because, offices have undergone a tremendous shakeout in terms of vacancy rates over the past couple of years through the pandemic. Now, in contrast, retail spaces, although they did have a vacancy hit initially, they're now back to pretty much the traditional vacancy rates already. So, but it turns out office is taking a lot longer than we figured it would take to have them come back to occupancy. So offices might be an opportunity for converting going further into the future. Next slide, please. This is a slide showing the rough distribution of conversions. Again, office tends to lead the list of conversions, followed by factory, hotel, and then on down the list. And some of these are actually various combinations of offices. Financial and government could also be called office. Next slide, please. So I'm going to get into some numbers here. So the number of buildings in 2050 that will be 50 years old or older will be about 4.5 million buildings on a base of 5.9 million buildings in 2018. This is from the Department of Commerce, most recent data available. In other words, 77% of all buildings existing in 2018 will be more than 50 years old in 2050, which for the lion's share of those buildings is beyond their useful life. In terms of square feet, we see that it's about 76 billion square feet existing in 2018 will be 50 years old or older by 2050. I put these numbers out because the numbers are, to me, staggering, and there's opportunity here to reconsider how we use these buildings going forward from now and certainly into mid-century. Next slide, please. Oh, we're missing something. We're missing a slide. Oh, thank you. This slide shows the number of 1- and 2-floor commercial buildings that will be 30 years old or older in 2050, based on a 2018 base. 91% of the 5.9 million buildings, 1 and 2 floors, will be 30 years old or older in 2050. And that's about 68 billion square feet. Now, I do numbers. So 1- and 2-floor buildings are sitting on seas of asphalt. They have a very low floor area ratio. Let's say a 0.2 floor area ratio, meaning that 80% of the land is asphalt and 20% is a 1-floor building in this case. That's equivalent to 7.8 million acres of land or 12,000 square miles of land, which is a tad short of twice the state of New Jersey. So this frames a tremendous opportunity, in my view, to start planning ahead for using this vast amount of building and space differently in the future than we use them now. Next slide, please. So here we see from the National Association of Realtors, they come up every 3 years or so with their community preference survey. And they do a lot of interesting things. I use their work all the time for my presentations and analysis, but this is a survey from 2020, actually just before and during the pandemic. It turns out in the circled area there, about half of all American households would want the opportunity to live in an attached home, apartment, condo, townhouse, if there was an easy walk to shops and restaurants and a shorter commute to work, and they were available. This is a staggering figure to me, and notice that the figure has not changed much over the years since 2015. Next slide, please. I think that's it, though. Yeah, that's it. So I want to bring our panelists on, and I'm going to, we'll all be on the screen. We'll all turn our cameras on, turn off our mute. And I have my first question I want to pose, actually starting with Tracy Lowe. First question is, my question's up here. If so many people, half of Americans, want to live where adaptive reuse opportunities are, millions of buildings and billions of square feet by 2050, the inventory is so large. Why are we seeing more adaptive reuse going on now, and what can we see in the future?
Professor Nelson, you're raising a really important point, which is that in the US right now, we're trapped in a paradox where there's more demand than ever. Our population is growing, right? And also, to your point, preferences are shifting. But we have enormous amounts of obsolete inventory, and the communities of opportunity that people want the most, right? Short commutes, walk to amenities, are scarcer than ever. So we're trapped in that paradox because the built environment changes very slowly. This is something, this kind of evolution takes generations to happen. Real estate as a sector, generally speaking, for a variety of reasons, has a real lack of dynamism. And so that leaves us trapped in this paradox, and it leaves a lot of American households settling for product that they don't want. And the same thing goes for American retailers and American employers. It's really hard to find the right product in the right location right now. And there's a host of reasons why that is, that are logistical, regulatory, financial.
So Tracy, could you introduce yourself to the audience, and I'll have the others introduce themselves too when they come on.
Sure. I'm Tracy Haddon Lowe, and I'm a fellow at the Brookings Institution at Brookings Metro at the Bass Center for Transformative Placemaking. Thank
you so much. And I guess we'll go on to Drew.
Good morning, Drew Sparisi. I'm the CEO of GBX Group. We're based here in Cleveland, Ohio, and we acquire, rehabilitate, and preserve historic buildings in urban centers across the country.
So how would you answer the question we just posed, or just?
Well, I think I thought you just wanted the introduction. I'm sorry, Professor
That's
Nelson.
Okay.
But I think Tracy, hit the nail on the proverbial head there. We don't just look at the communities we invest in on a building by building basis. We tend to look at them as a community by community investment, and we see that changeover, can take 10 to 20 years. Of existing buildings changing from office or warehouse or manufacturing over to incorporating a residential component, because there are so many needs that are different in having a residential component in the community that was formerly all office, manufacturing, and storage. So Tracy is spot on.
Thank you so much. And Leslie?
Hi, I'm Leslie Moody. I handle community outreach for Vivo Living. We're located in El Segundo, California, but we have properties all across the country, so we are not geographically specific. And we specialize in conversion of obsolete properties into residential housing. For the last couple of years, we've focused mainly on hotels to housing. And my answer to the question would primarily be financial. If we can get it done quickly, efficiently, and cost effectively, we will have the ability to produce affordably, attainably priced housing. And if you make it financially feasible, everybody will jump into the market and get it done.
Thank you very much. I want to follow up on all this. The first question was just sort of the appetizer. Let's get into your experiences, either directly or from what you hear from your clients and associates, on what the various barriers are to adaptive reuse. And I want to start with Drew, and then maybe go to Leslie, and then finish with Tracy on this. So Drew?
Definitely number one is cost. I mean, there's no question to conversion over. You can take an office building and one can just imagine the utilities and other infrastructure components that are necessary in a residential building that are not required in an office environment. And it's very expensive to do that. And then the second piece around that is a barrier, is just the time frame it takes to get all the amenities around an office environment to attract people who want to live in a community that was formerly office. For example, we're all going to talk today about wanting to walk to restaurants. We're going to want to walk to grocery stores, entertainment. Those things are very different in an office environment than they are in a residential environment. But definitely the cost barrier, and when you have developers and communities looking at having similar costs for moderate or low income housing compared to luxury condominiums, there needs to be something that bridges that gap, and that's the place for the government to come into play with tax and many other incentives. And I will also, just to talk about that for a second, we've worked with more than 40 different federal, state, and local programs in the past. Getting programs that are supposed to do the exact same thing to work together can be very mind-numbing and oftentimes almost impossible. That's an area where I think the government can help with, and we are working with some governments to try to streamline to allow those programs to work together.
Thank you. Leslie?
Well, to add on to what Drew said, and everything he said is spot on, but a couple other elements is residential building code is different than, for example, hotel building code. And you wouldn't think so because people sleep in hotels all the time, but they are quite different, and that can set up barriers. The other one that I want to bring up is just inspector familiarity with code when it's in adaptive reuse. One of the situations that we come across a lot of times, especially in smaller metros where adaptive reuse is a newer thing, is inspectors just may not exactly know how to go about handling it because it is not their normal day-to-day work. And it would be incredible if we had just training across the country on formalizing, streamlining inspection of adaptive reuse properties to residential. That could smooth a whole lot for us who are doing this work.
Thank you very much. Tracy, what have you seen around the country?
Chris, everything that Drew and Leslie said is right. So the one thing that I'll add is Drew was talking about cost, which is this is what every adaptive reuse developer will tell you, and I've been talking to them all over the country. But the very first element of cost, before you even get into cost of construction, is price of the asset. And this is the first barrier to adaptive reuse, that in order to say, like, hey, this current thing isn't working, I'm going to do something else with it. That means you have to admit that it was worth less than it was worth in the past. And the process by which that admission would happen typically involves a dramatic decline for the building and for the community that the building is situated in. Very few buildings are totally vacant, for example. So a lot of things are kind of stuck in at half occupancy or less. They're not doing great, but they also haven't cratered to the point where the operating income is less than the carrying cost of the building. And so getting things to the point, essentially like allowing something to decay to the point where it's really obvious that it's not worth what it was before, that hurts. It hurts the owner and it hurts the community. It's something that the owner and the community have incentives to fight, because vacancy is bad. It has a lot of negative externalities. So figuring out how to reduce the pain that's involved in repricing some of these assets and transitioning them to a new value proposition is a key part of facilitating more adaptive reuse. And that's not going to be strictly a public or private sector solution. That's something that's going to take like a lot of hands on deck to work through. And, you know, that's going to be like local finance institutions working with local governments and who have taxing authority.
Yeah, and so, Tracy, it's funny, I'm sitting here smiling because one of our biggest arguments with a lot of local governments are they have these programs available for vacant buildings, and it's like, we want to acquire this building over here and it's 25%, occupied. Do we have to kick them out before we can get your program? I mean, it's that change in thinking, I think, is part of what you're talking about, Tracy. So
I'm glad you raised that.
It's a lot of pain to wait for the last light to go out, and it takes a lot of time, and it hurts for places and for owners to go through that.
So that leads me to the next question. I'll start with Leslie on this. What do you think are the low-hanging fruit opportunities for adaptive reuse in your area, what you do, or around the country?
Well, I already mentioned, I think, nationally training for the planning departments, inspectors, fire marshals would help a whole lot. Reducing parking requirements, particularly on efficiency units. You'll come to a town and they require 2.5 spaces, even though it's an efficiency unit where one person lives. It doesn't make sense. We're seeing more and more cities doing studies. We're seeing it, believe it or not, a lot in Texas. They're very forward thinking there. A lot of cities are eliminating those parking requirements, which helps so much because that can really be a barrier to the number of units you have in your property. And just setting aside or even having the room for more parking can be a hurdle that you can't get over. Another financial impact that we have experienced is impact fees, like education impact fees. Again, a studio apartment will not typically have a child at the local school. And yet, for example, in one town, we were assessed impact fees at $12,000 per unit, even though every unit in the building was an efficiency unit. And on average, we have one person per unit living there. Those fees increase costs on rent, where if we didn't have that fee, we could come in at 70% AMI. With that fee, 140% AMI. There's just no way to get around it. So I think taking a realistic look, we understand that cities need to fund their schools, but is that the right place to be funding it and to push that fee onto the developer? And then my last low-hanging fruit, and this one to me feels very obvious, but boy, if every city could just take a look and compile a list of obsolete buildings, maybe do a little bit of pencil work on it, and then come to us with their needs. What are their needs? I mean, we know we're talking about housing here specifically, but they have school needs, library needs, medical needs. Boy, if I were a city, I'd compile that list and I'd be shopping it around to every developer out there.
Well, Leslie, you mentioned impact fees. I actually have an article in online at Up for Growth. I don't know what the link is, but you can look it up. It's called something like Confessions of an Impact Fee Pioneer. And I've been engaged in impact fees since the 1980s. I've written a lot of books on these things, been to court, drafted at these things. And I think you hit the nail on the head. We haven't done enough in the professional research side to create the nexus between the type of unit and the impact on schools and parks and other things. And my article highlights the things we need to do to generate the data, to make the argument, and even go to court to make the case. And I have a book coming out in the fall that really gets into that in terms of equity. So you hit something there really personal to me. Even though I'm a pioneer, we've done these things wrong in so many ways. We need to fix it before my lifetime is out. So Tracy, what are your low-hanging fruit ideas?
I don't know if this is low-hanging fruit, but what real estate is going through right now is an important moment to rethink, how the sector is regulated. And I think for municipalities and local governments that are looking at not just their zoning, but also their tax structures and really the entire ecosystem in which land use change happens, it's time for local governments to adopt a new paradigm that isn't just about using those frameworks to say what they don't want, and to start using those frameworks to say what they do want. You have to move from being a county of no to being a county of yes. And we should recognize that, for example, just objectively, from a local government perspective, adaptive reuse is better than new construction. That's something. It's better for the climate, and it's better for the local government because it involves putting uses in places that are already served by existing infrastructure, instead of running a Ponzi scheme on new infrastructure. So if you just start from a simple top line, look, it's better, then that should be reflected in everything that Leslie was describing about the transactional process of doing development, but also that's reflected in the long-term fiscal structure of the place.
Thank you. And Drew, what are your low-hanging fruit lists or alternatives?
I really think the local governments getting educated on all the different programs that are available to help their communities. As I mentioned earlier, GBX, when we go into a city, we don't want to do one project, one building. We want to do many. So over time, we work with the local governments to help educate them on all the different programs at the federal, state, local level that are available to them that will work with the buildings in their city that need adaptive reuse. And what we find is it's a very difficult struggle the first few years, but after that level of trust and that education gets there, you start to see other developers, other investors come in and start to use that mix of programs to help them. And unfortunately, I think a lot of our local governments, they know their programs, but they don't know the other programs outside of their control that can help them with their assets. So that education process of our local governments, I think, is low-hanging fruit, and it doesn't get enough attention, I do not think.
Thank you. So when I think of adaptive reuse, I think my first impression are New York City converted lofts. And then I think of the price tag, and I couldn't afford a New York City loft. How do we make adaptive reuse affordable to the lower and middle income households, especially in quality locations like downtowns or near activity centers and so forth? And we'll start with, we'll put Drew on the spot on this.
Do you have a week or maybe a month to answer that question? That's the most difficult part. And I think that's where the biggest role for government and incentives comes in. Because if you look at, developers and investors, they're in the business of making money. And if you could use the same space to put in your expensive New York loft versus moderate workforce housing, they're going to go for the expensive loft most of the time. So there needs to be some incentive to bridge that gap, and we do see some programs. I mean, you have the 9% and the 4% federal credit on affordable housing. That's great, but that's a nightmare for developers to use, just logistically, and the process to get approved. So that we need to see more, the bill that we started off this discussion with today, a 20% credit. unfortunately, I don't think that's enough to continue to encourage it. And if we want to encourage moderate and low income, that credit needs to be towards moderate and low income housing, not towards everything. Otherwise, your New York City loft scenario is still going to get the 20% credit. So I think there needs to be a balance there. But that is the difficult question, but that's the role of government in these programs. I don't think there's any way around that.
Leslie, what are your thoughts? You're in the trenches on this.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think Drew's right, but I also come at this from a slightly different point of view where I feel like there's not enough funding out there to buy your way into affordable housing. So if you take an approach from the other side, which is purely speed to market, because Vivo, we have our own in-house construction. Our speed to turning a property over from hotel into housing is tempered only by the city that we're in, and that as fast as they can move, we can move. And so if we can get a property turned over in a matter of months instead of a year or more, that's savings we can pass on. And in fact, so our properties are market rate. We have not taken any government funding to date. And we target coming in at 80% AMI. Sometimes it's even lower than that. Again, we can do it if we can move as fast as possible. And that has to do with streamlining permitting in the planning department and the impact fees we talked about, or by rights, conversion or of use. And so that's the difference to us, that, one of the most expensive things is just sitting on an empty property while you're waiting for your approval to come through. Cities often ask us to, in our negotiations with them, to set aside some units. We have no problem setting aside 10, 20% of our units because our actual market rate pricing is right there in line with that affordable pricing.
Well, thank you so much. Sort of on the same thing with Tracy, I want to put her on the spot and sort of suggest what kinds of federal actions might be available to help leverage resources to allow adaptive reuse to be for affordable housing.
Well, I think that there is already like a huge amount of I think the federal government is the primary source of subsidy for affordable housing, and so I share Leslie's sense that there's essentially almost like no amount of spending that is just going to buy our way out of the housing crisis in the United States. We should build more housing. But I think that we also need to understand that diverse neighborhoods are made of diverse housing types. So the other problem that we have, besides not enough housing, is that we are building one kind of housing product for one kind of lifestyle and not allowing people choices about where and how they live. So, for example, you want downtowns to be affordable and accessible to everyone. Put a diverse inventory of housing there and let people figure out how to make it work for them. I have lived for years in what is technically legally a 1-bedroom apartment with my partner and 2 kids. And, that may be something that 50% of respondents to the National Association of Realtors survey would not choose to do. But I do it because that's what makes the kind of location that I want to live in affordable to me. And I've learned how to live that way very comfortably and happily without subsidy. And I also don't need pity for it. So I think that, there's a lot of moralism that goes into the way that we regulate housing. And instead, we should give Americans more freedom to figure out what works for them. And we should be maximizing choices in the best locations.
Yeah, and Chris, Tracy triggered something. We brought in a very large employer to adaptively reuse historic buildings across the street from our headquarters. They brought in 600 jobs. They wanted to build a new site. And what they found attractive about it was a lot of their employees are young. They want to live where they work. They want to stay there. So that employer is actually acquiring existing properties next door to build housing there as part of their corporate model. We're starting to see a little of that. And I think that's getting into that moralism a little bit that Tracy was talking about, a little bit of it, not a lot of it, Tracy, but a little bit of it. At the end of the day, it's good business, but it's also being a good person that they're investing money and subsidizing that housing out of, in theory, their profits. And we're starting to see more of that around the country.
That's a great comment. All the comments have been great. In fact, I want to touch on something. I do a lot of research in the demographic effects of transit-oriented developments. And what I find interesting is that one of the largest single movements of households are households with children towards transit stations, and yet we're not building housing for families with children near transit stations. There's a mismatch there. That's another topic, though. I think it's about time to go on to questions. I think we'll have the staff introduce some questions for the panel.
Yes. Hi there. My name is Anjali Kalachalam. I am the Senior Policy Analyst here at Up for Growth. And I'm just going to be, I'll just open up the questions. Any of you guys can jump in and answer. So one of the questions that we got is, can adaptive reuse help or lead to home ownership? Or how can adaptive reuse be used to support more than just the rental market?
I can answer that one. Like I said, we target an 80% AMI, which means that the person living there is spending 30% or less on their housing, which leaves 70% of their income towards other things that they want to either spend their money on or save. That is the key to encouraging future home ownership, right? You have to be able to save some money and build a nest egg in order to one day make a down payment on a home. I think that's really important that we focus a lot of our housing development on breaking this chain or cycle of living paycheck to paycheck. It is 50% of our country lives that way, and it leaves a lot of people one paycheck away from financial disaster. So if we could get more housing out there and more reasonably priced housing out there, then we can also encourage more future home ownership.
I'll jump in here too and say that, if we understand that the vast majority of adaptive reuse projects that involve housing are going to be multifamily projects, that means that if we want to talk directly about home ownership in that context, we're talking about condos. And condo production is something that varies really widely from state to state in the United States because of the specific regulatory environment in any one given state regarding how the long-term risk after construction is shared between the builder and the owners, right? Because the issue with condos with home ownership is that after construction, ownership changes hands. So there has to be a negotiation of how to share that risk, and it has to be something that's reasonable. So I think that this is something that states are really struggling right now to figure out exactly how to get and how to manage that risk in a way that enables production, but also protects homeowners who aren't as sophisticated as builders about building systems. So, this is very much front of mind, I think, for people post the Surfside condo collapse in Florida. And the answer is just that states need to take a look at the regulatory environment that they have for condo production and perhaps create some new tools for managing this risk in terms of insurance.
That is such a great point, Tracy. And quick flag, Up for Growth will be having a insights post on condo defect liability coming out in November. But one of the things that I think the interest in this topic, even just attendees on this webinar, tells us is there's a tremendous amount of interest in adaptive reuse. It's in the media. There's a ton of political interest. What are some of the things in the media and in popular narratives that are wrong? What are people getting wrong about this discussion?
I'll jump in again. I think there's a lot of interest in the media right now because of what's going on with shifting demand for office as a product. So the first thing is that this shift was not caused totally exclusively by the pandemic. The number of square feet per worker consumed by office employers in the top 10 office markets in the United States has been declining for well over a decade prior to the pandemic. And so the pandemic has greatly accelerated that trend. And now there's a significant amount of obsolete office product in especially key downtowns that are particularly dominated by spec office product that was built after around the time of the saving loans crisis in the 80s. So, you know, that product is just like buffets ain't never coming back. Workers aren't coming back to that kind of office. And but it's in prime locations. And so we can't just you know, not do anything with this office project, and we got to figure it out. So I think one thing that people have wrong is there's a lot of kind of like smoking hot takes that adaptive reuse of this product is actually, the developers that specialize in adaptive reuse are very creative. They specialize in problem solving, and they can figure out what to do with a lot of this product. And it's just a matter of, you know, waiting for the eventual haircut to come on the price of the assets so that they can get to work on reusing them for something else. And then the problem I mentioned, which is that none of these office buildings are 100% vacant. So I think there is still a unique problem left with what to do with kind of 80s era office buildings that are 1 million+ square feet, the kind of bigger, wider, more gigantic super block type buildings that developers were building around that era. Those are hard to adaptively reuse as housing. And so they'll either need to be demolished or adaptively reused as something else that's probably not housing. And so we have other needs. Can the other needs that we as a society have, can we figure out how to get those into those buildings? This may involve thinking bigger about who builds, who buys, who rents between the public and the private sector. So and then also like you know, rethinking the role of institutions in places, because institutional land uses are probably going to be like obvious to go into a lot of these. But you know, many places want to place like limits on institutional growth. So it's something to be thought through and worked out, but it's not something that's just like automatically impossible. Towns are dead. That's ridiculous.
So I want to have a last comment on this before we have a departing comment, I think, from Mike. I think this is all about expanding choice. So many people that I have come across over my career, basically they say that everybody wants the single family detached home in the suburb. That's all we should build. We should put our subsidies there. The heck with downtowns, the heck with apartments. Those are bad people anyway. And these are conservatives. And I grew up, you know, thinking the conservatives were all about choice. You don't constrain people, you empower people. That's a different kind of conservatism, I guess, these days. But in my perspective, the revitalization of existing stock, the reuse of existing stock simply adds to the choice palette of the market. And so I think we're all about the business of expanding choice, not narrowing choice. And I think we're out of time, Anjali, and I guess it's time for the wrap up.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you, Chris, for being a phenomenal moderator, and thank you to our tremendous panelists. Up next, just for closing remarks, we're going to pass it off to Brian Laughlin from the American Planning Association, our final sponsor. Additionally, yes, thank you. Additionally, Up for Growth has a policy brief being published on this topic at the end of the month, so please look out for that. Thank you so much.
Okay, my name is Brian Laughlin. I am the chair of the APA's Housing and Community Development Division, and we focus on a lot of the issues that were being talked about today. And we're particularly excited about our continued partnership between the APA and Up for Growth. They do amazing work and fantastic advocacy, as you all can see, and we're excited to be a part of that. A few parting comments. We think this is an incredibly important issue. This is a housing crisis unlike any we have ever seen in this country, and it continues to affect a broader and broader swath of both regions, geographies, income levels, and it seems to be very much a crisis that is being experienced by all of us in one way or another. And because of that, it's a housing crisis that we firmly believe that is not going to be solved by a single solution. As Tracy was just saying on the panel that just wrapped up, that this is not something that we can just spend our way out of. We need to rethink the way that we provide housing and produce housing in this country, and adaptive reuse is definitely a part of that. It's part of a suite of tools that the APA is very much behind, along with Up for Growth, including promoting ADAs, promoting inclusionary zoning, promoting things like removing single family only zoning, which Gainesville, Florida just did moments ago. And other municipalities continue to do so. So we think this is a very broad conversation that affects all of us. And so we all have contributions to make in that regard. As you can imagine, the APA has a lot to say and a lot to think about how planning affects housing and how planning affects adaptive reuse. And one thing that I would encourage everyone to think about, as we start to shift toward more and more adaptive reuse in municipalities, we need to make sure that the infrastructure is there to support residential uses. So some of the conversation that you just heard was around what happens when you start to put housing in areas that were previously commercial, and making sure that they have the school support, that they have the libraries, that they have the transportation infrastructure, so that they can be healthy, thriving communities for residential uses as well as the commercial use or the hospitality use that was there before. There are two resources in particular that the APA has on the issue of zoning reform and adaptive reuse. And I'll put those in the chat window, and I know Up for Growth will be circulating those after this as well to everyone that attended. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you so much to Congressman Gomez. Thank you to the panelists and to Chris, our moderator, and thank you to the sponsors.